Should we go?
Okay, all set?
Yes.
All right, we'll call this meeting to order. The Ad Hoc Facilities Committee at 11:03 a.m. Roll call. I don't have a list of all the members, so if I could just have everybody go around the table and say your name.
Sure. Ian Griffiths, Burner Schober Associates.
Paul Marnsky.
Garrett Bader.
Chet Lamers.
And Brian Johnson. Alder Galvin is excused, and I believe Jesse is, will be arriving shortly. We entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So,
We have a motion by,
Discussion, there's a typo in the agenda.
Okay.
We're looking at C1 is approval of the committee minutes from the February 21st, 2022 meeting.
okay. I'll second that amendment. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Back to the original motion, which we have Genrick and then Griffiths, right with an S. Yep, with an S. So, any further discussion? Seeing all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item C, approval of minutes. Any discussion? Otherwise, we'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
second.
Motion by Marnsky, second by Bader. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item D, regular business. Item number 1, consideration of possible action and review of the facilities assessment updates for City Hall, Municipal Court, Police Station, and Fire Station number 1. I'm going to bring up just the first item that the mayor and I spoke about yesterday. And I think we both were under the assumption that Fire Station 3 was also going to be included, and so it sounds like there was maybe a miscommunication on that, wasn't reflected in the minutes, but sort of this assumption that it was happening. So, Ian, I'm just going to ask you, what would it take, maybe even broadly more for the committee? 1, do we need an assessment of Fire Station 3? And then if so, how quickly could we turn that around? And the reason I asked the question, do we need it?
Yep.
And I'm going to just
Has
give you a little bit of
everything been done
background
there?
info on this. The city council has pretty much already authorized using ARPA funds to do a report on site selection for a new fire station.
Yep.
We've also set $1 million aside with that same ARPA bucket for land acquisition and maybe some other consulting costs that go along with that.
Yep.
So if council is kind of already operating under the assumption that we're building a fire station, do we need to do an assessment of
Is
Fire
station?
Station
Three is which
3
one?
is West High School.
Shawano
Yes.
Avenue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah. I don't know of what's been done there, if anything, in the last 5 to 7 years. I mean, we had the report from 7 years ago. I don't recall us doing any work there. So if it is, it's probably pretty minor.
Yeah,
So I'm guessing there's no significant update on it.
okay.
But I can double check, but
Yeah.
it's not gonna take a lot.
Yeah, there seems to be a consensus amongst council that that station is exhausted its useful life and it's being replaced. And that's why I asked, do we
Yep.
even waste the money and time to do the report? And I'm certainly open to committee feedback on that.
Why don't I take a look and just see if there's anything in our files that has been an update to it that might warrant an updated thing? But if not, then we leave it.
Okay. Yeah, and what we're trying to accomplish, I think, with this committee is a couple things. One is, of course, facility existing condition report, and then understanding what our costs are and what we need to be bonding for over the next maybe 3 to 5 years as part of our capital improvement plan. But then the other piece is if, in fact, a new facility is warranted in any of these instances, right, that we can account for that too.
Yep.
But when you look at something like police department, for example, it needs a new roof, whether you're using it for a different purpose or not. So it's, so that piece to me is just, kind of a little bit of a different assessment. And I would look at Station 3 the same way, right? If it's going to be torn down, that's one thing, but if it's going to be repurposed and it needs a new roof, it needs a new roof.
Right.
You're not losing the value.
Right.
So, okay, so you're going to check into, Ian, how long it
Yeah.
would take to do that?
Give me by the end of the week. Give you an assessment by the end of the week.
Okay. Okay, so with that sort of elephant out of the room, how do you guys want to proceed with this? Just kind of take up report by report? That'd be the most efficient way? In which case then, we'll start with City Hall. And Jesse, how are you? What's that? Am I interested in it?
Kristen, would you be able to just give an overview of the assessments?
Sure.
Just
You
kinda
wanna
walk
come
us
up,
through.
you wanna come up here, or would
Yeah.
you, more comfortable, up to you guys?
Yeah, maybe just at the table.
Maybe Trista, for the benefit of the whole committee, just introduce yourself and your role.
Sure. My name is Trista Hobbs. I'm Assistant City Engineer for the Special Projects Group here in DPW. What my small group does is we oversee capital improvements projects for all of the other departments, as well as we oversee our bridges, parking ramps, and the city's requirements at Lemble Field. So I work a lot with Brenner Schulberg on a lot of our facilities upgrades. My initial overview of these is for not just these four buildings, but all of our city facilities have in need of HVAC upgrades. And I think that was pretty evident in these 4 reports, and that's some substantial costs. Aside from what's in these reports, the one thing I did want to say that these reports do and don't do is that what these reports do is it gives you a snapshot in time of what those facilities are right now with their current use, their current layout, the current structure. What it doesn't do is take into, and it's no fault of BSA because that's not what they were asked to do, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't take into account space needs or regulatory, outside of building code, any regulatory requirements that may be expenditures for the departments.
Okay, appreciate that. I know we have Chief Davis here, and I go to that space needs assessment, and I don't know, Mayor, I mean, City Hall probably hasn't fundamentally changed too much. Fire station, we know what their needs are. But I wonder, Chief Davis, could you perhaps maybe speak to space needs? Because we've got, obviously, the technical reports here on what repairs need, but could you speak to space needs a little bit?
Sure. In our organization, the current facility really does not meet our space needs. We have adapted it over the years to get as close as we can, but we have issues with women's locker room space in particular. We do have some evidence storage issues because we have an off-site facility that we're in the process of trying to find a replacement for. But really, it's not, we suffer from 2 problems when it comes to space. It's the lack of enough space just for the number of people we have using the facility, and the way space is allocated in the building, if that makes sense. Modern police facilities, you try to have common areas for people to kind of congregate in and have that natural, talking about cases or neighborhood problems or those kind of things among employees. Also, you want to try to have some public space, which we really don't have. We have adapted a room on the 2nd floor of our facility that serves as a kind of community room sometimes, which creates problems because now we have to bring people into the secure area of the building. It violates rules for criminal justice information systems, and we've been graded down on our audits sometimes for that because of that. We have units that are teams of people who are spread out physically throughout the building. So, for example, my operations commander has an office on the 2nd floor next door to one of his captains, but his other captain is on a different floor in a different part of the building. So we have people spread out that normally you would want to try to have together. It really just, so it's both of those issues with our facility, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, the thing that, I think those comments are all really well made. The thing that jumped out to me though when looking at the police station needs assessment was in comparison to a new public safety building, how small these costs are. $1.2 million that might actually include some of the work that's being done on the roof right now, so that number might actually be a bit lower. I think it's been a disservice in some respects to the police department to have this huge public safety discussion ongoing, and not enough attention being paid to the quality of the existing structure. And so I'd love to hear the committee's thoughts on that, reaction to the assessment itself, and just generally speaking, what people think about identifying, especially what those critical needs are, and needs within the next 1-3 years, and just taking care of them. And then also making space for this discussion about how we can better purpose the facility that we have right now.
Mhm. Yeah, and to piggyback on that, Mayor, I know I've had a little bit of angst about approving some of these significant requests for City Hall in particular, for similar reasons, right? I wanted to kind of go through this process and understand, gosh, if we're gonna stick $10 million into City Hall, is there another option? And especially if, you know, you were to, in a hypothetical scenario, have a developer take this building over and renovate it, you know, are we kind of throwing good money after a bad purpose if it's gonna be used differently? Not to say that would be the end game, but right now, I think at this point, it's understanding all options and what makes the most sense for the city of Green Bay. And I think this report really helps us start that.
Well, it gives you a starting point as to what your immediate needs are, things that should have been addressed over time. And, I mean, I realize that the city's under budget concerns and discussions, and I mean, that's what's happened for years, and that's why we're in this position, so. I mean, I'm kudos to the city for taking a look at this holistically and saying, what should we do? Instead of just Band-Aiding and not Band-Aiding.
Do we have does anybody have the information on the study that was done for the police station? It was commissioned a couple of years ago. And I don't think that
was
has ever been given to us. Do we know the size of the new facility that was recommended and what their probable cost was at that time?
Wasn't that probable cost like around $50 million?
I thought it was 35 was the number I had in my head.
Yeah, it's 60, so.
It was a big number, I remember that. It might be 50 now, though.
And that was about 5 years ago at this point, I think.
I mean, what might be more important is just the number of square feet that they recommended for a new facility. Because one way of looking at this is simply saying the current condition report that we have for the police department says that they need $1.2 million in facility upgrades, and that current facility is 42,000 square feet plus a garage, so you could extrapolate what a new facility would cost. But if the new facility is budgeted to be a much larger building, we need to kind of know what that is to make that comparison.
That 1.2 million does not include any cost of expansion, correct?
No.
That's purely
maintenance.
making the existing facility.
That's correct.
So I think in context of what we talked about, it's a good number to know, but it's not probably inclusive of everything that
Right.
the chief just discussed.
Exactly.
Would ideally be desired.
Yeah, I think timing is an important discussion of what we're here to do as well, right? So if we could say, look, it's not practical for us to consider a new police station for 5 years. I'm making that up. You know, okay, what are the repairs we should do in the next 5 years
Right.
then? You know, and how can we put together the plan for everything?
Yep.
I think that's ultimately what I'd like to see, not necessarily today, but out of this committee, is to be able to make a really informed recommendation to full council about when things happen and then what should happen in the interim.
I believe in the packet back in in February, we did have all the Bray architects' information, and then they're the ones who had kind of done the space needs analysis for the police station and get some site selection. So I could go back and try to look at that. It's our February packet. It was a very big one also that
Yeah.
included the Bray
Okay.
information, so we could research that again.
Yeah, and the other thing that's going to get kind of directed back to this committee as well, that sort of site selector for the fire station, I did make a request that report come back to this committee. So as we start thinking about stations 1 and stations 3, and what you do with that, I think the intent of the fire department is to want to merge those 2 stations into that new station, so the administration will become part of Station 3. You know, unfortunately, because of, I don't want to say unfortunate, but there were certain members of council that kind of wanted to really accelerate that discussion. I would have preferred to have been able to at least contemplate what does a merged department look like from a facility perspective. I just didn't get the sense that that was going to be an option. So I share that with you because, of course, that report is happening right now. That we'll be back at this committee when it's done.
What's the timing on that?
I don't know if we've gotten a recent update from Chief Litton, but I know it's ongoing right now. They were sharing some GIS information from our IT department with the consultant. So I would imagine within the next month or so. That should be.
Relatively soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it safe to assume that the fire department's plans are separate from City Hall, Police Department, Municipal Court?
Well, I don't think that was initially the intent. And that's what I mean. I think, there was a majority of council that kind of put the cart before the horse and said, you know what, we've already made the decision, we're getting a new fire station, and immediately jumped to, how are we going to pay for it? And we're going to order this report, and we're going to go by the site. I really wanted this committee to have the opportunity to assess our existing facilities and then make a recommendation, but that's just the order it's happening, so, politics.
Alder Johnson, I do have the reports from back in February, the ones that were actually completed in 2017, so if you want some of that information, I have it, but.
Do you have the,
They originally said that the existing facility, original construction 1968, approximately 55,500 square feet at 2 stories plus a basement. Existing site is 2 acres, about 140 stalls. And what they were looking for was they were looking to go, the building area, they wanted 135,000 square feet with an 80,000 square foot footprint on first floor. This acreage, of course, stayed the same. And at that time, they were looking at costs of $34,400 to $38,000. That was without acquisition costs.
Million.
Thank you, 34 to 38 million without acquisition costs.
2.5 times the square footage, is that right?
Yes, it went for 55,000. They were looking to go to a building area of 135
Yeah.
with an 80,000 square foot.
Is it,
I'll bet you there's indoor parking.
Did that assume that the existing building was kept, or was that the existing building was discarded?
That was not assuming the same building.
And the only thing that I would say in response to that, and I think Director Ellenbecker can probably reinforce this, but the finance department was not included in those discussions back then, so it was really sort of a blue sky process in the sense of, like, in an ideal world, what could our police station look like? Not, given our fiscal constraints, what should our police station look like? And so I think it's the latter process that we really want to have this time around.
Well, quite frankly, whether the existing building can be reused at all. And if it can, that totally changes the nature of looking at needs versus layout versus how much you have to build new versus how much you can renovate. The cost could be notably lower than that.
Just to confirm what the mayor said, I think what happened, and this was in 2017, and I think the day they knocked on my door saying, hey, we found a site, can I have $1 million to buy for, a site for public safety building? I'm like, what are we doing? And where are you going to pay for the building? You want $40 million, so it did kind of get stalled out at that point. And, like I said, I think it was the team that said what they wanted, but at that point, they had not brought in the finance team to figure out how we were going to pay for it.
which is kind of why we reset this committee in the way that we did. Bring in more perspectives and
So-
more city departments.
So my fair is, in assuming that when we first started doing this, the thought really was that police station was kind of driving the whole discussion here, right? Like, that was the most critical, urgent.
Police and the $10 million that was estimated by the Parks Department for City Hall maintenance. Those two things, but then we added
What time
fire.
frame were you asking about?
February.
Okay.
Yeah, but then we added fire, recognizing that there were some imminent needs there as well. And that's, I think, where we're still at,
Right.
is police, fire, Station 1, Station 3. And then really municipal court is in this conversation too, because if there's a consolidation opportunity, particularly on the existing site of the police department, muni court, it made sense to kind of lump them into this discussion.
I mean, what is the utilization of City Hall? I mean, in terms of the amount of square footage you have versus the amount of city hall that's utilized? Is it 100%?
I mean, I would say it's a vast majority with the exception of fourth floor, which is where our IT
Yeah.
department is located, and there's also a dance room. That is used for some programming, but not consistently. We're also in the process of scanning a bunch of documents that are currently stored on fourth floor, so the
Yeah.
additional square footage opened up once that project is completed. So it's essentially every floor with the exception of four.
Maybe 80%?
Yeah.
Mhm. And even then, you think about, I mean, the city is in a rare situation where we're actually growing
Right.
compared to others, right? So if you start to think about, okay, 50 years from now,
Yep.
what are our needs? So how do we even begin to go? Ian, I'm looking at you in particular as someone who, kind of does this for a living. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how you crack this egg?
I mean, I think you do need to have a utilization study of your existing buildings, and how they're utilized, because that is gonna inform you. This is the tangible piece, right?
Mhm.
You need air in the room, you have to meet code, all of the stuff that you have to do. Does it have to be in this building? Is the building appropriate for its needs today? I mean, the building is solid. I mean, it's built.
Are you talking about City Hall? or-
Yeah, City Hall. I mean, a lot of the buildings that you have, Building 57, I mean, it served the city very well. But is that how we do business today? That's the question, I think, for all of these facilities, is how do we do business today? And can we do business for tomorrow in yesterday's facility?
Mhm. I think that same question applies to Chief, and I think that question is, in a sense, already been answered for fire.
Right.
So I don't think we necessarily have to worry about that until the report comes back, but in the meantime, how do we handle City Hall and Police Department?
And what do people think of really just addressing all the critical needs that are highlighted in this report? I don't have all of them right in front of me here, but just scrolling through them when the report was made available to us, and then scrolling through some of it again today, it's not a very daunting number, but just in that critical needs column.
Yeah, I
Right.
think there's gonna have to be critical needs that are met, because even in the best case scenario, you could be looking how many years out, right? 5 years out to pull together a larger scale project, if that's what's warranted.
If you're gonna put a new mechanical system in your building, or a new electrical system in your building, I mean, you're gonna wanna utilize it for as long as you can to get that return on investment, obviously. I mean, what you have right now has served you very well, but if the panel downstairs decides to blow a significant breaker tomorrow, you might not have power for weeks. So, you're kind of living on the edge of, it may not be imminent today, but by tomorrow afternoon it may be. So, I think there are things that, need to be looked at, what are immediate, but what might be immediate, and then how large is that? Because there's no point spending the updates to the mechanical systems for City Hall if you choose not to be in the building 5 years from now. I mean, that's, because whatever the building becomes probably won't need that same mechanical system.
In my opinion, I would think some sort of study or discussion needs to happen with understanding the current needs as has been outlined, how that ties into it. I think hearing that and looking at this, you would clearly do an addition of some kind. I don't think it means, though, that you couldn't reuse the existing building in some fashion. Do you put money into bathrooms? All thing right now, though, if the bathrooms move. If the bathrooms get expanded to a new part of the building, reincorporating both male and female counterparts and that sort of thing. That's where I would hesitate doing that now. But to the degree that review could be done sooner rather than later, to the mayor's point, this is not a daunting number. If you can put pencil to paper, though, on what that addition cost likely is, and then have your whole police department range on, that part to me seems like a very easy part to address and get going on sooner rather than later.
I mean, I don't know in the Bray report, how much conversation there was around new versus existing, or what the request of Bray was at the time. I mean, I'm just scrolling through the piece to try to refresh myself from February, and, I mean, there's,
It seems very idealistic.
yeah, right, I mean, it's,
Rather than
this would be
realistic.
great, right?
Yeah.
But how are we gonna get there? And do we really need to be there? Is this what Green Bay needs?
And to maybe kind of throw another thing into this discussion to complicate it, but obviously we have departments right now that are submitting their capital improvement plans for consideration when we go through the next bonding cycle. And there are some things in there where we're gonna have to make decisions. I know there are a number of things related to City Hall. I know, Chief, you've got some things in there related to locker room renovations. You know, do we renovate the locker rooms in the next bonding cycle, or do we wait and figure some of this out? So, you know, I want to make sure that we're not spending money that's just going to get ripped out.
Right.
If we were to, just to put these guys on the spot here for a second, if we were to say today, yes, okay, a revised study, a sit down with police personnel, the chief, to say, what square footage wise is needed today? And then to figure out how that's incorporated with the current envelope in a new addition. Here on November 15th, what would be a time frame to do that, to have it resolved back and have something that's actionable again?
I mean, 90 days, at least. I mean, I think if you sit down with each of the departments, get a real sense as to what's working and what's not from their perspective. We know what it is from our perspective. By the time you get that, do some schematic layouts to say, okay, we need X number of square feet addition, and we need to house this many vehicles. We need to, you know, increase the size of the lot by taking over the next city block, or we can fit it within the perimeter of what we have, or, you know, I think there are elements of that. Once we have that, then, you know, getting a number to associate with it, you know, isn't gonna take a tremendous amount of time, but
Mhm.
it'll probably take all of 90 days to come back with a thorough enough report that everybody's comfortable, and we don't have just kind of
Yeah.
pie in the sky, which I think is what you're asking, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I don't know if there are funds reserved already to be able to do something like that. And I
I was
don't
just
know what
gonna
that
ask.
cost would be. But in terms of the timing, to at least sit down, and the chief, I think, brought it best when he said flow. And that's what
Yeah.
none of us, I think, really talked about, the flow of the existing and the flow of what the new would be, and what needs to be and what part functionally close together to work. But that kind of study like that, I think, would tell us that answer. I think we'd be surprised by the relatively low number.
I think City Hall flow is a really important conversation too. And how do we interface with our residents, our customers, to create a positive experience for them? Because I don't know if that exists right now, and it's just because of the design.
Right.
So, Diana, I'm gonna ask you a question because we were using, I think, some old borrowed money, right, to do this report. What kind of a balance do we have left on that?
Just looking at right now, I believe we borrowed 40,000, we had ended up spending about 6,000 of that, leaving us a balance. I think when we met last time, there was about 34,000. I'm not I don't think you have the second, there were 2 invoices. Okay, then there was 13,000 I know came through from BSA, and then you're saying there was additional expenses? Pam, are you seeing?
I want to say that the report, this was 25.
Okay. I remember Steve saying something about 16 and then 7388. So in total, this was a 24,000, this information was 24,000. We had a balance, I think, of 34 and change. I would say at this point, money's still available without going anywhere else. We had just over $10,000 available yet to do some additional study.
So Ian, without putting you on the spot, if you had to ballpark estimate what a space needs would be for City Hall and Police Department, which I think are our 2 primary needs.
Probably 25 to 30.
Okay. And the reason that matters is because obviously we'll need to find
Yeah.
another, let's say, 20,000 to
Yep.
be safe. Diana, is there any place where we would have 20,000 that we could pull from that wouldn't require us to find, I mean, we've got maybe some leftover contingency for this year yet? Do we have, is there any like contractual service budgets that might have some availability? I really prefer not to go to ARPA if we've got funds available elsewhere.
Yeah, because you're right, it's she verified, yes, it's right around 10,000, that's available without any other questions. We could spend that money. Contingency.
Possible fund balance.
Fund balance in the 416, which is where this originally was funded out of.
Bottom line is, can we find that 20? And then is there a way that we can do it at the staff level, or are we gonna have to go seek additional authorization from council?
If you grab it from contingency, it would be a authorization from council. If
But
there was,
do we have existing accounts?
we could find a fund balance that would have then a remaining balance of about 10,000, that would not need the same kind of authorization, it would be under our procurement thresholds.
What's the procurement threshold, isn't it 25?
Typically for a spend, yes.
Okay, so anything above 25 will have to get council authorization. I'm just, to Garrett's point, I'm trying to
Yes.
piece together the timing in my mind
Mhm.
of when we can get this report initiated versus when we can get it back. So if we're over 25, we gotta get council approval, so.
As I said, without putting me on the spot.
Yeah, understood, understood.
What he's saying is 25 is a great number.
But I mean, putting you on the spot.
picking up on that. I mean, yeah, we have the plans of your existing facilities, so I mean, we have the report, we have a general assessment, we know what the square footages are that we've assigned to some of these things, so, you know, taking that and saying, okay, we need new locker facilities or new bathrooms or more offices, I mean, we have some good info that we can build off, so. I don't know if there was anything additional from Bray that wasn't in the packet from back in February, or if that was the extent of everything that they produced.
I think there were 2 or 3 presentations that were produced that were given back then to some committee level, and that they would have been all included in that packet from, that we concluded back in February.
Okay.
Diana, what's the timing of the bond request?
At this point, it will be, we were looking to start bringing back the 2023 bonding request either the end of December, end of this year or early in 2023, that we would start talking and start really looking at the 5 years, since at this point, we're not able to take any more items probably off of that list and put it into operational. I mean, if anything, there might be something operational that'll go back onto our bonding list. So we're looking end of December really, or push out till January.
And the reason I ask, of course, is I think critical needs on this report that we can meet, like I'm comfortable moving with them forward with bonding, but if there are things on this, even if they are critical need on this list, but it's possible that this space study could turn that upside down, I don't feel as comfortable moving forward with those in the capital improvement plan. I'd rather wait a year. But obviously wanting to make sure that we're not creating a risky situation for our facilities, so.
There is more work, but there's never a reason why. We could always go for second bonding, you know, in the year.
Sure.
There's just a little extra work, a little extra initial costs for the bonding, but that doesn't, if we're not ready, it's better to not bond for something that we're not ready for.
Right.
We can always consider a second pass.
Yeah, and just some things that come to mind, like locker room renovations, I'd rather have a little bit more time. I think of some of the HVAC systems, I'd rather have a little more time.
The reason why the earlier we try to move it forward is so that the DPW can do their street construction and then some of the park projects, that they know they have their money and they can move forward for the
Sure.
2023 programs. So if this wasn't ready, we could always consider another bonding later in the year.
Is the bond request just for 23 or is it multi-year?
Right now, we currently do 1 year. We have a 5-year capital improvement plan that's been starting to, you know, year after we're kind of seeing the same information. And so it's been a 5-year, we start to look at 5 years, but when we put the actual bond request in, it's just for whatever we need for that year. So it would be money that we would get in spring of 2023 for projects to hopefully get done in 23 or 24.
I mean, I guess the other thing is, you know, as you talk in some of these mechanical projects as well as electrical, I mean, getting product.
Right.
I mean, we can design it now, but.
5 years anyway?
You could bond, right, you could bond for it, but if you don't have your bond request till spring,
Right.
the idea that that work's gonna go into place in 23 is probably not gonna happen,
Right.
if you need air handling units and things with long lead times.
Yeah.
We've made obligations, though, that I want that to be a habit, but we've made obligations to that bond request on other items, just to get the orders placed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Judge, is it Jago?
Mhm.
Look at that. We gotta get you on the news more so everybody knows how to pronounce that.
The less I as a judge am in the news,
You know, we're kind of leaving you out of this discussion, and it's not intentional. We think about space needs of your facility. Admittedly, I think the whole reason Munity Court's been brought into this is because if we want your land. So I don't want to leave you out of the space needs discussion if it needs to happen. How are you doing in space?
so spatially, we're pretty good. We've downsized our staff over the years. So we actually probably, in some ways, maybe even have a little too much space. Just because we have, several, I would say 3 empty cubicles, for example. I think the courtroom itself is a good size. The one thing that I would note is if every single person that had a citation and a court date showed up on their court date, we would be overrun. We would be completely overflowing with people. Fortunately, that doesn't happen because the court appearances are usually non-mandatory. But for what we get, it's a good space. And then the adjoining area, sort of that lobby, since we have gone back to having juvenile pretrials in person, where Attorney Mays is actually coming down to the courthouse and holding those pretrials, that space has actually been getting kind of filled up with people waiting. So, we would really need, basically what we need is chambers, probably a courtroom of a similar size, that sort of waiting area or some sort of area off of the courtroom, because also that's where juveniles wait when they're waiting for their court date or their hearing, since those are all confidential hearings, as well as probably in that area 1 or 2 offices, if you will, one for the prosecutor. And then it's just nice to have kind of an additional office if an attorney and client need to meet, where it can be private, things like that. And then kind of some administrative office areas. It feels like there's a decent amount of dead space in the court. I'm talking wide hallways, just kind of that type of stuff. But spatially, that sort of top floor of the municipal court building is pretty decent for what we need. Maybe could downsize a little bit, but I wouldn't too much.
And I don't think we downsize so much as to recognize it if one of the scenarios played out that we want your land and we're going to
Yep.
demo the building and incorporate you somewhere else.
Yep.
I think that's probably the time to have that discussion. If it's, hey, we're just going to leave you alone and we're not touching your land, then I think, it
Yep.
doesn't sound like you need many modifications, if any.
No, so I guess, and my point kind of is, ultimately, our building is fine for what we need it for. If you're going to take that over and maybe expand the police department, which I totally understand, there's really 2 restrictions for the municipal court. The first is, we can't be in a tavern, and the second is, we really need to be distinct from the police department, so that when people come into the municipal court, they're not, walking through the hallway of a police department and thinking, well, I've already lost because they're connected.
Sure.
So those are kind of the 2 main things to just keep in mind. I don't think the tavern thing will be an issue, but it is in the state statute. Yeah. I imagine that was a problem maybe in, the early 1900s or
Is
something.
that next to the one that says you can't have your camel downtown on Sundays?
It's probably right around there. And the only other thing I would bring up is, I'm sure Chief Davis would maybe agree with me, is it would probably be nice if GBPD had a workout facility that wasn't directly underneath the courtroom. Those are kind of the main things for
Okay.
us.
So is there like a general consensus or agreement that a space needs is necessary as the next step?
And you would tie municipal court into that?
Well, it doesn't seem like, they have such limited needs, Ian, it doesn't seem like that would,
I think what we would do is we'd look at the police department first and kind of get a sense as to what the needs are there, and then make a determination from that as to how big the site would need to be, and then kind of from that, make a determination if we need to relocate or incorporate or somehow parcel some of that together. I mean, I think there certainly can be, the idea of some shared services, whether it be through City Hall or police or fire, I mean, but by the same token, I know there are restrictions around what that entails too, so, yeah.
Can I ask a different question, and forgive me if I'm way out of order, but if I tally up the 4 needs assessments
Yep.
that were done, I'm coming up with a number of like 11.34 million in repairs on the high end, okay? And my experience in building new buildings for the tech colleges, if you go and meet with your departments, you'll get a space program that is existing plus. And I don't fault the people you're asking. That's the reality of saying, how could you make your area work better? So my question is, what would a new building to replicate 1-to-1 the square footage that currently is allocated cost? And if we just start with that number, oftentimes, what I like to do is kind of drop some zeros off and say, if you turn 11.3 million into 113,000, would you spend $113,000 on a $400,000 house? Or are you looking for a new house? And you can get really caught up in the minutia. The second thing that I would ask is, at the end of the day, what number can the city's budget hold, and what will the constituents agree to support? If that number is anything over 20 million, good luck, it's not going to happen. Or if that number is, no, I think we have the capacity to be able to borrow and show good faith as to why we're going to spend this money in lieu of. And then I think about the fact that, look around, and with remote work and so many other changes, there's probably some used buildings within the city that meet 75-80% of the needs, that don't necessarily need $11 million to make them functional. So the one that I'll call, in case in point, Brown County Sheriff's Department, what I read was in 2011, $5 million to buy S&L motors. What a perfect adaptive reuse. Even normalized to today's dollars, and with inflation, you're talking 6-7 million. Are there buildings within our city that make more sense to invest good dollars in? And will the development community embrace being able to acquire a vacant building or the land that the city hall was on? Another one I look at is, I grew up, born and raised in Kaukauna. Their city hall and fire station together was $19 million. In today's dollars, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million. And I understand the city of Green Bay is substantially larger than Kaukauna, but if you go look at their facility, they built what they needed, not what everybody wanted, not what everybody thought they needed, and they had to make some concessions, but they ended up with a pretty nice building at the end of the day. So when I hear needs numbers that say like just one element of our program is going to be $40 million, I'm calling that's utopia. That's somebody's idea of everything they ever wanted and then some. But if we start with some of the pieces that are right at the end of our noses, I think we'll end up making better decisions. Then you go into and say, we did some real estate looking, and there are a few buildings that meet the footprint of 40,000 square feet or whatever the combined. And we actually like some of their locations better than City Hall. The last little comment that I'll make, and then I'll be quiet and ask people to respond, is if we don't want to invest $11 million into City Hall, what private developer is ever going to want to do the same? I mean,
I think it would, yeah.
unless you can
Depends
come
on
up with a
change of
performa
use.
that says this is housing is going to be so much more beneficial that I can afford to stick in
Right.
$11 million, is anybody in the private side of the world going to want to spend that type of money in this building? Or is the first 11 million better off going toward the $25 million new
Right.
building?
Right. Exactly.
And that's kind of the question I've been asking, right? If you're gonna put 10 million to repair, do you want that to be in a new building?
Mhm.
Which goes back to, do we have the space that we need?
Mhm.
Yeah. So some really great questions, though.
So Chet, you and I are on the same page, and when I looked at City Hall, Fire Station number 1, Municipal Court, Police Station, the current square footage is about 175,000 square feet,
Yep.
rough numbers. You've got $10 to $12 million in repairs teed up right now. If you take that current square footage on a one-to-one replacement, it's gonna be $60 to $70 million of new building.
Okay,
That doesn't count FF&E, doesn't account for moving expenses, doesn't account for land acquisition. So you're somewhere between 60 and, I don't know, throw out a big number. $90 million in new buildings. You know, we take the fire station kind of off the table because it feels like that's already headed down its own path. It feels like the big concern we have is police and what they're doing. I agree with the utopia of the $35 million thing that is twice the square footage they're currently in. So if you bring that back down to what's functional, what's reasonable, you know, I don't think you're maybe spending that kind of money, and now it gets a little bit closer to, is $12 million in maintenance really the best thing?
When I even maybe add on to that, Paul, if you look at police, it seems to be the good example, right? We've got the maintenance needs, but if we say, hey, we've still got these additional space needs, maybe a $10 million renovation or, you know, an addition or something like that can solve those space needs versus an entirely new facility. I don't know.
I mean, I don't think it's for us to make these statements, but I don't see the climate right now supporting a $75 million new combined City Hall, Police Department, Municipal Court project.
Diana, I mean, I'm not sure, I don't even know that we'd have that kind of capacity.
Technically, we do,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I mean,
to Paul's
yeah.
point,
You're right.
Not without destroying our bond rating, though, right?
Yeah,
we're
we-
only at, what, 40?
We're definitely under our
40%?
debt capacity per the state.
Yeah.
But again, of course, obviously, whatever you borrow, you do have to pay back, right?
Right.
And so that would be a large increase to our debt payments.
And we can't just ignore fire. I mean, if they are gonna go forward with combining 1 and 3 on a new site, you know, they're gonna spend $10 million on that project.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so that's going right to your,
Right.
they got to the table first.
Yeah.
Sorry, chief.
Well, and none of that is
It's
a
for
one
certain.
deal, right?
Yeah.
Because we've
Yeah.
allocated $1 million,
Understood.
as Alder Johnson said,
Yeah.
for, you know, for that sort of site acquisition study, and some engineering costs and things like that. We have not moved forward
Yeah.
with that decision as a council. One thing that I just wanted to come back to quickly, maybe in a different way, is maybe ask our finance department to come to the finance committee with a summary of and I forgot to mention the deficient columns, but it's essentially the deficient and the critical priority column, and just to see what that amount is, how it compares to our existing CIP, and also, to Ian's point, if there's anything in here, you know, that is really a long-term investment that would make sense for us to do. There didn't seem to be too many of those out there, but air unit housing is one for both, it looked like Muni Court and PD for sure, and I don't know exactly what that is or what that means. Is that something that you would not want to do if you were going to be reconfiguring the building or selling the building? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? Are you gonna change some of the elements of the HVAC system and keep changing, or are you gonna say, okay, we just need to gut the system and redo it? You're gonna, take this one bite at a time and just take forever, or are you gonna commit to doing that? And I think that's getting back to some of the questions here is now the time to make the commitment, or do we have to do a better job of identifying what our immediate needs are and what we're planning for the next 10, 15 years in terms of how we're going to tackle these issues that are only gonna get worse,
Mhm.
right? So, there's a ongoing maintenance piece that needs to occur. And we just did something similar for YMCA up in Door County, where they knew they had significant items that hadn't been addressed for many years. And they needed a plan that really said, okay, this is what the plan is gonna be for the next 15 years. This is how we're gonna spread it out. These things are critical. And this is the plan for what we're gonna address every year. And we need to get architectural services, and we need to get construction services in place for those things to happen, so.
Is that a surge and bay facility? That one needs work.
Yeah. So it's certainly, it's possible to take this and format it in a manner that is, okay, this is how we're gonna eat the elephant.
Mhm. Okay.
And,
I'm a bean counter, so I think about this as, you know, what's the net cost when you get done? So I've heard us talk about what needs to be done now, and that kind of doesn't change. But the operational expenses associated with an older building, I mean, it's got to be higher than the operational expenses, ongoing expenses of a newer building. And so when you think about the time value of all those expenses over time, and I would assume that you would want to think about this as a 20-year, 30-year investment.
Right.
When you get out of that,
Right.
doing that analysis, so on one side you have the making the changes that you need to make, and then the ongoing expenses associated with older buildings on one side, and the expansion of those facilities on that side to new facilities, you're going to end up with a net cost or a net savings, right? Probably a net cost. And you're going to have to ask the question, is it worth the additional net cost associated with that in order to get this new things that I want, right? Better shared spaces and for the police department and other things like that. So in my mind, that has to be, when you come to the table with, here are our options, you also have to come to the table with, and this is what you're going to have to pay for it.
Right.
And it's not going to be exact. I mean, it's going to be, it's going to be rough.
Going back to the earlier discussion about the needs analysis, I put down needs versus flow in the context of the chief's comments. If we were able to do that and approve that for, you were suggesting City Hall as well, correct? I'm more focused on police department personally, and if you tie Unicord into that, it's one
Yeah,
thing.
and disclaimer, I mean, the reason I wanted to bring City Hall into this again was recognizing there's $10 million of repairs. And if police department was gonna build a new facility, do you build them together? Is that an option to contemplate? So,
I'm not against that, and I
Yeah.
don't know, I won't put words in Ian's mouth, whether that range roughly you were talking about was for both facilities or per facility. That's
no,
what it
I
costs.
think you could do a lot, because we need to get an understanding of what those shared facilities could be. I mean, there may well be utilization of a room like this could be, you know, used on multiple fronts by the police department and or City Hall. So, yeah, there's depth. The more you look at, the more overlap you'll see and the more efficiencies there will be. So, I mean, once you start doing the report, I think, you know, the concern that I have is in this report for Bray, they did look at a fair amount of land options. I mean, if we take that off the table, then I think your $25,000, you can do a fair amount with that. But if you're gonna try looking throughout the city and existing buildings and all of that in addition to the assessment, that takes a lot of legwork.
Well, and I don't know that we need that, and here's a good point based on what you just said, and I want to make a comment on what Ched said too, is there's a unique opportunity here to look at this property in a different way, or to consider what we have down at the police community court, that almost the whole block right there, minus a little, you know, piano key from, that the ADRC has there. What I didn't like about that past report from Bray was that I simply looked like they went to a GIS program, put in what is larger than 20 acres, and all this stuff spit out that we would never ever put a building.
Right.
I would respectfully disagree with Chet at one point, was that, sure, the county got a great deal buying the old SL motors to do that, That is the absolute worst place for that facility. Real estate-wise, it should not be there. So when you look at where this building's located, where the police department's located, they're both tax exempt right now. To be able to reuse tax exempt and not take taxable off, or the odd thought of, do you make this property taxable and take a TIF created value on this property over 27 years? That's a lot of money. So I don't think we should waste time at all trying to find properties all over the place. We know, I think, what we have, and we have some good footprints here. I would rather focus on the needs. What physical building square footage is needed? Does it fit in something we have right now, or do you build adjacent to what we have? That could tie in land next door to something for fire, or for however a muni court would be repurposed or reincorporated without the cost of land, without taking taxable land off,
Right.
and with maybe making non-taxable land taxable.
Diana, not to get into the weeds, but when you think about the bond term for a capital project like the building, what kind of term do you typically get on that?
If it, I will have to verify the information I got from Jonathan from Ellers, but if it doesn't have a public safety feature, it's a 10-year term bond, and if it has a public safety feature, it's a 20-year term, which was surprising information
So
to
if
me.
we were to bond for just City Hall, we'd have a 10-year term, but if we combine City Hall with police, we can get a 20-year term.
Where was that? I will go back and verify, because I asked
What
him
was the
twice.
logic, what was the logic to that?
It's
Is
exempt.
there a
I have
logic to
no-
It's the state legislature, you
It is
People like
exempt, it is,
cops, period.
right, it's an exempt bonding, and I so have no idea, I'm not sure that is why the purpose of, why it, and that is.
So we can just build the world's biggest police station and put City Hall in it. And bond for 20 years.
Immediately, Ellers, who's with our financial advisors, they did come back, they have a way where, as soon as you take it out in this type of bonding, and you can turn around and then refinance it, and then you can take it out for 20 years. So, like, they've worked through this with other municipalities, like, they have a workaround.
Yeah, right.
But the immediate is 10 years if it does not have a public safety feature, which really limits it, because I would want to take it out for 20 years. Like you said, the useful life is gonna be 20-plus years
Oh,
on a
yeah.
building, whether it's an expansion and/or a new purchase. You would hope you could take it out for a longer period of time.
Well, it's tradition, I understand bonds probably give you a slightly different rate, but is it, municipalities do traditional financing? I know we talked about that at one point with the shipyard, right, pursuing that path. And it's not important to answer that today. The reason I'm asking the question, though, is just understanding, to Paul's point here, what is the, right, if it's a $60 million building, we probably know it's a non-starter, but also what is the capacity for debt service? Because that term obviously influences that dialogue. And then, not just the capacity, but what's the appetite? Which is probably more important. We know we have the capacity.
If you would like to read, let me real quick read from Ellers. He says, 1, for municipal building with no public safety component, the city can issue GO, general obligation debt, for up to 10 years. For municipal building with public safety component, the city can issue GO debt for a term of up to 10 years for the administration portion of the building and up to 20 years for the fire and police portion of the building. We would need the engineer to provide a breakdown of the square footage. So no matter what, the administrative is only 10%. Or, in either case, we can issue interim financing, which is called a short-term note or ban, to finance the entire building and then refinance the ban for a 20-year refunding. This is the common way of doing it, and this gives us the most flexibility. So they found ways to work around it, but for anything administrative, City Hall, I'm not sure Muni Court might be considered administrative also. Maybe it's public safety issue, but typically they're categorized as a function under our accounting, they're considered administrative. That would mean it would be a 10-year is the way currently it's set up without finding a workaround.
Okay, thank you.
But
And when we do the repairs, what's the term on that? So if we've got 10 million of repairs that we're gonna do, 10 million in repairs, like what would the term of that bond be? Or is that a no?
typically repairs on a building is typically 10 years.
Okay.
Unless it's, unless the useful life is longer than 10 years, then you could probably go down that path. But typically our bond counsel will come back and tell us, where it would fall, but I would guess it's still gonna be 10 years for the
Okay.
repair.
Thank you. Real
Question for Judge, sort of a random one, but is there any issue with theoretically co-locating the council chambers and municipal court?
No, I don't think there would be a restriction on that. Actually, I think that's how a number of municipalities end up doing it, especially the smaller ones.
Similar space, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I was even, in addition to that, I was contemplating what if fourth floor, you know.
Right, if
to
you
get
need,
more use
if
of
you need
that.
that land over there,
Right.
could muni court come here?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's just get all options on the table right now. right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so I go back to, is the next step still the space needs analysis?
I think that's really important to conduct, but I do want to take look at that deficient and critical priority list, if that makes sense, and just kind of get that to finance committee and council with the understanding that we don't want to do any of these big ticket items if they are long-term investments that could potentially conflict with future use.
Yep.
But if they're just things we need to do for staff safety.
And you could work on that with staff, right?
Yeah.
And BSA and kind of make that recommendation.
I would assume so.
Yeah.
So essentially your criteria there is, I'm gonna do it either way, I guess. So I just need to identify those things which kind of meets that criteria.
Right.
And then things that could be swayed by my decision on which direction I'm gonna go, I might pause those.
Yeah.
The other thing I would suggest, because if you do a new facility, hypothetically, you're still, 3, 4, 5 years out, right? So I would also add items that are at risk of critical failure in the short term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so high risk, critical failure items. Yeah.
So again, but that study would be for police and city hall
Yes.
together, right?
I think so.
Space needs you're talking about?
Correct.
Yeah. And then muni court would get added later if,
Yeah. I mean, there's not a tremendous number of spaces.
yeah.
Mhm.
It's not gonna.
But that's worth verifying just the needs that were discussed, correct, on what does that equate into to square foot, to your earlier point? To throw that on a fourth floor, I'm not saying we have to.
Well,
but to know what you have left over.
I think Judge kind of answered it in a way for us. He's saying that you've got adequate space in that building now, so you just use that as your worst-case scenario.
Take that number right
You
now.
need 12,000 square feet, or actually 6 roughly, to accommodate wherever you go in the future.
So that's what, half of the floor here? Right?
Yeah, I think we're 10.
10, 11, something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
First floor, 13.3, floors 2 through 6, 13.4, 33.
So yeah, in theory, half of the floor
Yeah.
could accommodate uni court.
Yeah, because that whole basement at the court is the workout facility for law enforcement. We don't even, the only time we would use it is if one of us wanted to go and work out.
Right.
So,
That hasn't happened yet?
nope.
That's where you say snap.
But have you used the shower?
No, that's
Apparently
the
council
other thing.
thinks that's
I
it.
do not need if we're gonna do any remodeling or moving the municipal court, I don't think we need to install another shower.
You have to think about future judges.
Yeah.
So Diana, I want to go back to the space needs funding. Do we have a place we can do that, or do you need time to figure that out, or do we need to go to council?
Well, I would assume the request could go together to BSA, but I mean, in the short term, we have 10,000, we don't have to ask anything about. I mean, whether or not they could get one facility started, get us a better estimate,
Yep.
and then, I don't know which would you think is a higher priority, of the police or the city hall, and then we can, in the meanwhile, try to find another funding source, but, that way we can kind of get a couple things moving forward at the same time. One could actually be almost requested at this point, get that in the hopper. They can't do really both at the same time, I would
Sure.
assume.
Which one can you get done for 10,000 or less?
I hear you.
So maybe,
So I have a contact at the Center for Public Safety that we've collaborated with in the past. My thought is to maybe reach out to him and maybe get him in as part of that assessment so that we I mean, we can do an assessment, but we've got to sit there and analyze, what current trends are, and does this make sense? He may be able to get us to the goal line faster, at a less cost, so. Let me put a call out to him and see where he's at with how he may be able to assist us in this.
Okay.
So they do this all over the country.
Sure. And on the city hall side, and I remember I was at the Main Street Conference in Kansas City, and we did a visit to Lee Summit, which is nearby, and we went to their city hall. And, they were talking about how they had this reputation of being a very business-friendly community, and that kind of got reversed. And what they learned was that city hall wasn't customer-facing anymore. And they went so far as to take that report and they built a new city hall that was more customer-facing, and and all of a sudden it became known as this real friendly place to be again.
Sure.
It's just amazing how, the way you design your space and the way the public interacts with it can change perceptions overnight. And that experience continually goes through my mind when I think about City Hall and how we can change that experience, because I do think, and this is not to the detriment of anyone, that works here, but I think the design of this space doesn't make it very conducive and friendly to outsiders.
No, I think,
Institutional.
yeah.
It is,
Yeah,
yeah.
the previous city hall was far more decorative, far more kind of civic. And then when this building was done, the mindset at the time was efficiency.
Right.
Right? I mean, how efficient can we make this? And how don't we want these costs? And it served that purpose very well. But the purpose of it being inviting, it didn't.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's the case of point. I mean,
I agree with everything the three of you just said, but let me ask this question. If you could hire the happiest person in the city of Green Bay and put that person at the desk downstairs on the first floor at that salary, what does that do for your image and your interaction with the city? I mean, right now you walk into an empty hallway with an empty desk.
Yeah.
with me and a half
You
an
know,
hour, sheet
and-
paper
and-
says go upstairs to
And
DPW.
if you hire the world's
Parking.
best greeter, what's that compared to the millions of dollars we're talking about?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's for sure part of it, right? I think of the services that people most frequently use or need, right? If you want to pay a parking ticket, sure, you can have a receptionist there that directs you to where you need to go, or you can just pay your parking ticket on the first floor,
Right.
right? And not have to wander City Hall to figure out where you're going for it. So to me, it's again, how we use City Hall and are we designed to appropriately receive that?
There are many departments on the first floor that don't automatically need to be on the first floor.
We agree.
If
talking
you
about
took,
that.
if you took a room like this on the first floor versus the way it's utilized right now.
Yeah, currently our assessor's office, purchasing, finance is all on the first floor. What else? And payroll. And those are all departments that would not need to be on the first floor. The clerks, where they take, where the public walks in, that certainly
Yep.
should be there. But
Yeah, and part of it could just be an organizational realignment, right? Should the clerk's office, for example, collect parking ticket fees? I don't know, but it's something I think just to reimagine how we use it to create a more efficient system. And I think part of it could be personnel and staffing, part of it could be structural. Okay, so.
I want to throw a quick number out there,
Yeah.
just because this is just a point to ponder, nothing to act on, but you'd asked earlier, I think you rhetorically asked, or who said it, if we're not going to spend $10 or $11 million on this building, who is? So 96,000 square feet City Hall, and look this up quick, confirm. So that's roughly your $100 a foot, $10 million rounded. Over at a great building I'm doing across the river, I'm at $135 a square foot. So you think about improvement costs, you're not terribly far off there. Assuming floors 2 through 6 on 13,000 feet per floor, you could do 12 apartments per floor, 60 apartments total, an average $1,100 a month in rent. Gives you about $800 grand a year. It's about an 8 cap on $10 million of going in on this project. Just again, don't necessarily think that you couldn't repurpose this building in a different way that would then become taxable if the decision was made to tie this into a public safety center. It's not crazy.
You just volunteer.
No. But it is not crazy. So know that you have options. I think we have a lot of options on the table. I think the biggest element for us is you maybe almost have too many options. But there are things that are possible in many ways uniquely here with the dirt here and the dirt 4 blocks south that could tie together a lot of different things that we're discussing.
Seems to me before we narrow options, we need to know what our needs are.
That's why I
Missing
think pure
something.
building square footage, what purely space building square footage is needed. And then you can figure out with what you have right now or what you need to add on to. I don't think we need more land there, we don't.
I mean, again, you know, over there, we have a 2-story building, right? Here we have a 5-story building. What could be on that site? Could it be a 5-story building if needed? I mean, we build the density of downtown up a little bit. It's pretty flat.
Yeah, and I think that's the other piece of the equation, right? Is you take 2 sites, hypothetically consolidate them into one, you go up, and now you've got a site here, there, wherever, right, that can be taxed, and you're less footprint, if you will, off the tax rolls, but you're also doing what's appropriate for a downtown, and I think, you know, the city needs to be a catalyst for those types of investments.
If you thought that this building could maybe generate somewhere 150 grand in property tax revenue, if you threw it back on the tax rolls and you do a new TID here and you collect that 150 grand directly for 20-some years, it's real money.
Well, it reduces or offsets, I mean, the debt service, right, on a new building, so it affects or impacts the financial calculation.
But the other thing I'm thinking about it, I'm in Garrett's camp. I think that you could adapt to reuse this building and probably meet your needs in a new city hall and not be too far apart when you think about what this building could bring in terms of value. The thing that I think would be also helpful is getting more realistic actual today costs on new buildings, because we've got a couple that are under our nose. They're just getting a little bit, they're starting to get old. Doesn't seem like 2016 is that long ago, but it is when you look at it. So again, I go back to City Hall in Kaukauna, 85,000 square feet. That's not that much smaller than this building, and I would argue some of the efficiencies are that you're not stacking things on top of each other. So the one restroom facility that could serve the equivalent of one in every floor. But that was a $9 million project in 2016. I mean, let's double that. And you're still not in the $40 to $50 million. Was part of the Notre Dame de Pere School, 87,000 square foot building, 27 million. They had to tear down a building, but built a 3-story school on a existing site no bigger than this. Again, that's kids have only been there 3 years. But at the end of the day, that's great. You can do all the needs assessment in the world. What will the taxpayers vote to approve? And I think right now, it's actually a detriment because you have so many projects at the same time. I think your conservative voting base will support a police station if it's for the right reasons. Maybe you take that problem off the table first. And you say, you know what? It's a bad look, bad optic in times right now where, you know, people are struggling and inflation's high to invest in City Hall. But we probably could get our constituents to for the right reasons, support an investment in law enforcement. Maybe I'm calling it wrong. And I think there is a benefit to not having that in the same building as your City Hall. I think there can be a barrier that's put up there, not rightful, but the same reason you don't want court inside of a police station. So I might, you know, my philosophy might be to pick this apart a little bit and kind of go to the end first. Do we have the bonding capacity to invest X million dollars, and could we get people to say yes if that was an investment exclusively in the police services? Now I got some vacant real estate here that allows some growth in other departments. Is that the best use of that? Maybe not. Police station got any value outside of here? I don't know. I think you're gonna run into, every time you look at $11 million of repair, to repair a building that doesn't get you anything different than you had other than it was neglected for 20 years. Nobody's fault today. It's just the reality of what happened. An investment wasn't prioritized into keeping the building healthy. It was prioritized in what the needs were in every other department. And now you got $11 million looking you in the face and you're saying, I sure would like to spend that $11 million in something that's gonna get me something I don't have today.
Right.
I think you could figure a way to fit City Hall in a $30 million building. And that, if that is 100,000 square feet of your 175 that you reference, then the other pieces are much smaller than that. I couldn't find them on each report. I was trying to find the square footage, and maybe it was in some of our previous packet.
Of all the different buildings.
Yeah.
That's all individual.
I mean,
reports,
yeah, and some of the spaces are quite different too. I mean, we have a fair amount of garage space, right? That's not the same type of construction that an office building is.
Mhm.
So, I mean, we have to look at what proportions of what types of buildings we need for what types of purposes, so that's gonna have a factor in it. I mean, I just pulled up the cost index on here for a building that was in 2016. If that index was 118 at that point, it's 177 today.
Mhm.
So what you built in 2016 for 100, just use the numbers as millions, for 118 million would cost you 177 million today.
Mhm. But it's not double. And
No.
And that's my point. Can't spend 9 million, if you doubled it, you're at 18, and you're at a building the size of City Hall.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Yeah,
just,
right.
I realize that construction has gone up. I mean, you know,
Right.
you probably have a book of projects that you can share, you know, we built this building and.
All our projects are in budget.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't know that we can go to the point where, like, it is double, quadrupled. There are, again, like, if you look at what was built for 27 million for an elementary school, you have no high base spaces, you have no, like.
Right. Low cost.
Low cost basis,
Right.
so. And I think with, if you knew you could get the commitment to do that, that's when you kick in these space assessments and figure out what do we need and what size does this need to be. But, in that case, they tore down a building, there was no reuse and revenue. If what Garrett's talking about, this building has some ability to become part of the puzzle to offset, that'd be really cool.
Right. You know, and another small factor in terms of offset, I think about, like, if you had a new facility, and I've seen this in other cities, back Garrett and I, when we were in Richmond, Virginia, saw this in their city hall. I mean, they had a restaurant on the ground floor that paid rent. You know, so all of a sudden you get a building with a lot of people in it that probably support that restaurant alone, right? Now you've got $5,000 a month in rent, $60,000 a year times 20 years, right? It adds up.
And a rooftop deck.
And a rooftop deck.
It's pretty nice.
Their city hall was also, what, 20 stories tall?
Something like that.
And Richmond's not that big. Anyway, state capital.
So next up is a study, all right?
Yep.
Needs assessment.
The needs versus what we have, and how can we.
So,
I don't know that I'm in alignment on that. We've got studies that had to be refreshed to do another study. I mean, I understand it's important to know what you need, but if it ends up on a shelf and it's now the third study conducted of what City Hall needs, and we still aren't solving the problem of what can we afford and get approved, why do we have the study?
I think that's a fair question, but I've noticed at this point, throw out the very study from years ago, I put very little weight on that in terms of, I wish, for right now to talk to the current chief and the current personnel and say, here's what we need today. I think from a pure building square footage, and that's why I put flow analysis. What needs to flow to something? I think it's not just a study for a study, because I'm with you on that. Nobody needs that. But this, I think, will actually answer what those studies did not, which is really functionally what do you need to be by each other and how do you build that, or how do you renovate to allow for that within a footprint you have.
But do we need to hire somebody to ask our staff what they need?
Well, if we're talking the range at which has been discussed here, I don't see that as being crazy to to spend on it, I really don't.
Okay, so hear me out. We pay 25 grand, we get this study, and we're all back in this room. Now we have a study that tells us what we need, and we're right back to the same question of, whew, this is overwhelming, because if we take $175 a square foot, we're talking about a $70 million project. What have we gained if we don't think we can actually get $70 million approved by anybody in the city of Green Bay?
I think I find out first and foremost, how much physical space does the police department need for operations, and how is this building being utilized right now? If this building's at less than an 80% efficiency factor, then I think it starts the discussion of, do you meld some things together where you're maybe not spending that kind of money?
Yeah, I mean, I get your point completely. I mean, the challenge becomes is, if you're doing an analysis of what could be, which is what Bray did, right? You know, what could be. Those are some pretty significant numbers. And we're sitting here saying, well, that's never likely gonna happen, right? Like, nobody's gonna get behind that. What is the real number? You know, we haven't identified what that real, the number in reality could be. And I think that's what would help us in this case, to say, okay, given that, we need to stay put, we need to invest in the buildings that we have, or, man, maybe that's not such a good idea.
So the first study you're saying is what, you define it as what could be, and I think what you're advocating for is what
What's reality?
should be.
Yeah, right.
And so if we can define what should be, now you have a footprint in which you can do some analysis on. And can I reuse this space? Can I not reuse this space?
Right.
But it does seem like there are other things we can be doing at the same time. You know, what is the value of repurposing? Maybe that's getting too cart for the horse, but what's the value of repurposing a building? And that's probably is getting the cart for the horse there.
But at least in regards to the police station, I think you could see real quickly, which is kind of the flow part of it, what can work within the existing footprint, and what would you have to build new additionally there. I think we'll be surprised by a relatively low number, I do. But short of knowing that, I don't know if we'll ever have that answer.
Yeah, when the Bray study was done, that was kind of done in a silo. I think it was police and fire, right? You didn't have your finance director in there, you didn't, so that's why, to Garrett's point, I think it's really hard to put a lot of confidence in it.
Right.
They probably did what they were asked to do, but
Right.
it wasn't necessarily something that council would have been willing to support at the time.
Right.
Part of the purpose of this committee, of course, I'm on this, Alder Galvin is on this as well, even though he's absent today, so it was to make sure that there were some decision makers in the room, you know, that could say, hold up, there's no appetite for that, you know, or, okay, this is worth contemplating.
Yeah, having been involved in a number of space studies, unless you're telling your architect to go in with the objective to reduce space by 15%, I would not be shocked when you come out of asking the users what they want with existing times something.
Can you give them the guideline, I mean, not exactly what you said, but nothing larger than what we have right now? The footprint has to be the same or smaller.
But does that address the need?
Right.
I mean, right, that's the question, is you can force the hand and say, well, we built it for 30 million, but it doesn't serve its purpose anymore.
But what I'm
Right,
saying.
so it's a balance.
Sure.
But I mean, I get what you're saying. If you ask them, you know,
Mhm.
I had a client that we did a weight training center for, and he laid out all of the equipment. And I said, that looks like big equipment. He said, yeah, I put it to 1.25 on the copier and made those things bigger so that I could get more space. We're like, well, that's not helpful, right? So,
Yeah.
right, I mean, that's not helpful. So we need to know, I mean, if they have 50 vehicles that they need to park and they're all standard cars, then we know how much space that takes. If they're all larger vehicles, we know what space that takes. Like, how many need to be inside? How many do you want inside? Right? Those are two different questions. And I think if we approach it like, what can we do realistically? And if we're realistic about this, it has a realistic chance of happening.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we're trying to get to, is some reality.
Where does that counterbalance come from, though? So when we're doing that study, asking people what do they want? Where's the counterbalance to say, it's not a candy store, there's got to be some constraints around that. So, I mean, I know how that works at Schneider. I'm not sure how that works in this situation.
How does it work there?
Well, you have finance people involved, and
They always say no.
there's a back and forth,
Yeah. Right.
between, okay, I heard you say you wanted this.
Right.
Now, talk me through why that's a good thing for us to do.
Right.
And some of it's like, to your point, it's like, no, I'm not gonna add any more heads. I
Right.
know you think you need heads, so I'm not gonna add any more heads to this department.
Mhm.
We're gonna figure out how to make it work. And till what's coming out of people's eyes, you don't add any heads. And then, if you have to, later on you do.
Right.
But there's a counterbalance to the well, we say the commercial side of the business side once versus what the finance folks come back and say, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
And let me show you why.
Right.
So Jesse, I would answer that by saying, I think the counterbalance is this committee.
Okay.
And that's why Diana's here and Pam is here. That's why I've asked other department heads to be a part of this when it's necessary,
Yep.
right?
And I can definitely feel that a part of this committee.
Mhm.
But when you do the space study
Mhm.
and you go talk to the people about their spaces, where's the counterbalance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that also is a credit to us is that all of the buildings that we would be looking at to do comparisons for are all public entities and have an obligation to share data. So the only argument that you're really gonna win is you're operating a police department out of this many square feet today. You can't deny that. It's not the best model, it's not the best practice, it's not what everybody wants, but it is functioning in this square footage. Now go find 4 or 5 police stations that people would tell you, our new police station really is working great. What's the square footage? How many calls do they average? And you start to compare that, and the data will tell you the story.
Right.
Different way of getting it than going and asking somebody, what do you want? If I went and asked my wife and kids what kind of a house they wanted, the square footage of that house would be different than what we could actually afford. And not because they're bad people, but because I've asked.
So that's a good point. Benchmarking is always
Right.
a nice way of understanding what,
Right.
where you should be.
Right, which is why I think the Department of Public Safety contact that I have would have that baseline data for other municipalities.
Mhm.
Then they can say, okay, 100,000 people, this many calls, this is the size of the department, but it doesn't include these things. It doesn't include
Mhm.
city hall function, or it does include city hall function.
Mhm.
This is where Galvin's almost kind of useful too. As a retired police officer, recently retired, right? And he's also on city council.
Yeah.
So he's got to understand the finance side of it.
Right.
And he could be like, you don't really need that training room.
Right.
And I've seen him do that many, many times.
And again, the data's out there, like, and I'd like to validate this, but the Kaukauna City Hall, 85,000 square feet, they say they have 49 employees. I don't know how many employees report to this building every day. Is it 149? Is it,
How many we got, Joe?
It's closer to 200.
and I don't know what departments are in Kaukauna that aren't in this building, but vice versa, but I think you start to be able to substantiate your need if you look at what's already out there, plus you have some ability to kind of say what was invested in those communities. Different way of solving the problem. But I absolutely agree, and I'm not a finance person, but knowing what you have the capacity to actually afford is really almost the first step of the problem.
Mhm.
And knowing what you could generate with the assets you already own.
In the context of a space needs analysis, I would assume you'd need like full-fledged architectural studies to really drill down on layout. But can you take a look at, because it seems to me that it's not the most efficient use of space at PD. In the context of the study, can somebody go in there and be like, at a high level, you could do a lot more with this space than.
Yeah, I think you have to at some point say, we need to do a schematic layout and say,
Mhm.
okay, these are all of your admin services, they go together.
Mhm.
This is storage that is or isn't on-site or off-site. Is that downstairs in a basement type facility? Does it need to be accessible? How secure is it? Does it need to be in the core of the building, not on the outside? I mean, there's all kinds of discussions that go on relative to, so you have to have some sense. I mean, the problem is, you start to get down a rabbit hole really fast. And you've got to avoid going down that rabbit hole and look at it objectively and say, okay, in general terms, this is how it is.
Well, and that's something different too, that we're comparing $1.2 million in maintenance for the police station versus a new building versus what I think everybody's kind of insinuating is maybe there's just an addition and a remodel. Well, that's gonna land somewhere in the middle.
Mhm.
So now that very quickly is like, holy cow, are we gonna spend 15 million on a remodel of a aging facility, and is it still right? Is it the flow?
Is it right enough?
Yeah,
right.
at that point, we're agonizing when we're spending 1.2 million in maintenance on a building we might not wanna keep. Really, now we're gonna spend 10 or 12 million to remodel it and add on?
I'm not agonizing that much over that number,
Yeah.
just to sort of be the most frugal one in the room in the discussion in a sense. I feel like we can make that building work. They've been making it work for years and years and decades. So if we can make it clean and safe and appealing for employees, I'm okay with that.
But I don't know that we know what that number is yet.
Well, I mean, we have it's not too far away from $1.2 million.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, my understanding of the 1.2 is it's really just maintenance and things of that nature.
I think that 1.2
What the-
addressed the female bathrooms.
Does
the
it
public-
address that?
No, I don't
No,
think
right,
so.
right, that's my point.
The public
So
accessibility piece to where they can't be and
You're-
evidence storage.
You're gonna pile on, let's just say for the sake of argument, a couple more $1 million worth of remodeling that they need for their efficiencies, flow, those
Yeah, I want to tell you,
things.
some of those things are already in the CIP, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
for the fence came back was $500,000 to put a fence up for security around the squad cars. Locker rooms, I think, were around $500,000, right? So
Okay, so you've
you're
already-
starting to add up now, right?
Yeah.
And those aren't maintenance things. Those are, we need to,
Functional.
yeah, those are renovations, right?
There's some bathroom stuff in here though.
Well, I think
What's
it's-
in there for the bathrooms is like code deficiencies, it's not a
Okay.
remodel.
Okay.
It is all strictly making it code compliant.
Yeah.
Or addressing aesthetic issues that need to be addressed for various
Yeah.
reasons.
What's driving some of those decisions? You think, we pick on locker room renovation, right? But there's more female officers today than there were,
Oh, absolutely.
40 years ago. So, those needs are certainly there, and the demand on the facility has changed.
Well, and I would call attention specific to a public safety building. Good luck trying to renovate one while you keep them functional. I mean, you have a fighting chance of doing that at City Hall, but it would be much easier thinking about a new footprint for a police or fire station that at the commencement of its construction, they move into. But, shutting down the locker rooms is one thing, but shutting down the locker rooms, having to do a massive renovation and keeping a police station functional seems like a pretty unreasonable thing. Having a new police station to be able to move people from City Hall into the old one temporarily while you renovate this building, much more feasible.
I agree, it's more challenging, but it's not impossible and it's done. I mean, we do work at St. Vincent's and St. Mary's, new surgery rooms. They're doing surgery in the room next door.
Yeah.
I mean, there are ways of doing it. Yeah, it costs money. Because you gotta blank off the ductwork. You can't have, there are things and procedures that need to happen to make that work.
So-
Yeah, certainly it's easier to build fresh, move, and then backfill. Yeah.
I think you got two questions in front of you, and one is, do you go forward with a study for uses, and the other one, to your point, is how do we go about defining what it is that the city can afford. I don't think that these things are mutually exclusive. I think you can do both of them at the same time. So that, I think it comes down to that, are we gonna go forward with understanding how the spaces need to be used? And I think that seems like a reasonable step. But I'm not sure what the next step would be when it comes down to understanding what we can actually afford. But that's gonna be a constraint, right? We know we need to do something. And we're gonna be constrained by what it is, the space that we have defined that we need to use. That's one constraint. And the other constraint that we're gonna be constrained by is what is how much can we spend in actually doing that? And there's gonna be a lot of options there, but it'll set some parameters around, and it won't look like the first study.
And I wonder if there's a way to reverse engineer that, working with Ehlers, and what I mean by that is to say, hey, what is the impact on our bond rating? And if I'm thinking about this incorrectly, just say so, right? What is the impact? Because to the mayor's point, we can bond a lot of money yet, right? But it's what is the impact of bonding that money?
Well, and it's a trade-off between your operating expenses and the capital expense that you're gonna have into the future that you have to.
Right, and so we can start to piece that together, right? So,
that you gotta play out.
right, so if we can say, and
Yeah.
a round number, we can take on $1 million of debt, right? Okay, but $1 million of debt actually gets us $1.5 million, because we're gonna bring in taxes from this site, we're gonna bring
Yeah.
in savings on maintenance.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So we can at least, but if we know what the payment out is that we can absorb, I think it helps
It'll-
us start to reverse engineer some of that.
it'll define very quickly what your possibilities are.
Yeah. And maybe even if it's a tiered thing, and I don't know if it would shake out that way, but $1 million has this impact, 2 million has that impact. So that we can start to weigh the pros and cons of that impact, and is it worth taking on or not?
It sounds like you're making a motion.
Well, I think there are two things, again, that have to be decided today that could be in one motion. And one, of course, would be the space needs study, if that's a necessity. I think we can just direct Diana to start coming up with some of that information. But the other piece are the critical needs. And then, to the mayor's point, if we send this over to Finance Committee, I think we'll put that into a motion as well, to send this over to Finance Committee to make decisions about those immediate needs.
That still has to be defined so we have immediate, and I think, what was it, immediate and
It's deficient.
deficient and critical? So we have deficient and critical. It's, even amongst that category, there was a need to define what must be done now and what potentially could be dependent on a future decision about what we do with
Yeah.
the other buildings.
Yeah, and I think I'm counting on staff working with BSA to be able to make that recommendation.
And then does that have to come back here, or do we?
No, I think that goes to finance,
Okay.
because they'll have the binding authority
Okay.
to make those financial impact decisions.
I think that sounds I'm totally on board with that.
And we can separate that into two motions, we can combine it into one. But if everybody's not on board with the space needs, it probably makes sense to host that motion separately.
Well, I would make the motion to direct finance staff to work with BSA on the deficient needs and the critical needs, bring that forward to the Finance Committee for discussion and possible action.
Okay. Motion by Mayor Genrich, second by Jesse there. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain from that.
Okay, so that motion carries with one abstention. So then we're back to the other point, which is the space needs study.
I think it's, in my mind, it's very difficult, and I'm not the building person or the real estate person, but it's very difficult to understand how to go forward if I don't have a better understanding of the use of the current spaces. And so I feel like that's just like one of those key things that we need to understand.
I think look at it more as a flow analysis rather than a needs study. Because I think it's fair, everything that Chet brought up before. It's the joke about how big of a house would you need, very true. But I think we heard the major things today the chief talked about. To understand those major items in the context of current envelope, I think is very important, especially for that building.
Well, and could you very quickly have a better understanding of police's needs, if you took the Bray study, there has to be some square footages outlined by department.
Yep.
And you're comparing that to the current facility square footage. And then you're just saying, okay, well, they had,
Triple this, double
yeah,
that.
is that really accurate or not? And maybe you're coming up with the in-between square footage of what they really need at police, as opposed to the, so now all of a sudden you've pinpointed, is there an addition over here on this site? You know, you've narrowed it down.
And I would say, I don't know that you're trying to get the porch just right. I think the benchmarking remark that you made earlier in the reference that you made to your a colleague
Yeah.
in that space probably has the best,
Right.
ability to say this is really, within about this range is really where you want to
Yeah.
hit. Maybe Bray's way over here and wherever.
Right.
I agree,
Yeah.
because the benchmarking is things that actually got done.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone finally put it into action and
Yeah.
got the support to make it happen.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think about is, you don't need to conduct a big study to say, okay, I'm about to go sell this to our
Right.
community. So tell me what you're going to be able to do with this new process flow. And you'll watch either the idea is, I saw it one time, or this has huge merit.
Right.
Being the finance guy, I would lead with numbers and then talk about the flow
Right? But my
later.
point-
But I mean, it's got to. It's got to come down. It's got to make financial sense,
Mhm.
right?
But what I'm saying is, we're justifying needing space based off of, this is what we're gonna be able to do with it. And if you can't even support that argument, then you are likely gonna have a hard time justifying the space, number one, and number two, figuring out how to pay for the space.
I would hope it'd be the other way around. This is where I would put a lot of faith in what would come back in this review. Like the word study's bad right now, but review is, let's see the current envelope. Where are the mechanicals in there? Where are the plumbing lines? Physically, what could lob where they're wanting it to
Right.
be? And then what does not fit in the current envelope? That way you kind of know. It's not really we're not building a playground. Here's what you could fit in here based on where all those existing mechanicals and lines are, and here's what you would have to consider doing off to the side. That way, if you can take space that right now is being used for something, but you know what, this is where you build out 2 brand new sets of bathrooms because this is where the lines
Right.
are. Great, then what shifts and squeezes because of that? And where do we run out of space, and that's what you're building. I think that's the goal here, is not to give a free rein, but
Right.
what do you squeeze out? If we can do that, if that can be put into a motion, that's what I would like a motion to do.
Okay, I'm gonna give you an opportunity to articulate that.
Motion to proceed with BSA for a review, a flow review, not to exceed, was it 30,000, was that the high end?
And I guess to direct staff to either find the funding or bring it to finance
Sure.
if additional funding is required.
Yes. Does that make sense?
So that is the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Jesse seconded. Any,
Well, the point of discussion would be, is that review for which buildings? Is it just City Hall and Police?
I think from what I've
You're
heard before
taking-
is that City Hall's included in with that. So
Okay.
yes, I think you do City Hall, Police Department, but I think you also have the background of Muni Court in that thought process to at least apply
Yeah.
that square footage that we talked
I
about.
mean, I didn't hear big needs for Muni Court.
Right.
And again, it sounds like there is some work with fire going on a little bit separately. So then we're really just City Hall and Police.
yeah, I think we're focused on that until that report from police is done, or fire
Fire
is
is
done,
done,
and
yes.
then that report will come back here.
Yeah.
So this, I would say, gives us a path forward on the City Hall and police. You know, without it, I don't know what else we would do.
I understand your point about the flow. I would just also like to emphasize the need to understand the benchmarking across other communities to get to the, what do people actually build and what works?
Is that part of what you were mentioning? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
Contacting that one individual?
Yeah, I'm gonna reach out to him and get a sense as to where he's at. And I'm wondering if part of this isn't, you know, him spending a couple of days here and really just maybe having elements of this committee as part of that discussion too, so it's not, so it fully meets the needs of this committee when it comes back. And we're not just spending dollars, but really answering questions. And I
Right.
think he has the knowledge, based off of all the other stuff that he's done in this field, that we can say, okay. I mean, I think the other thing is, like, is there a different way to skin this cat? I mean, is there a whole different financing piece? Is there a whole different development piece? You know, does the city have to borrow the money? Or is it a public-private partnership, or is it something completely different? I have no idea.
I'm not opposed to that, and we've talked about this even with the fire station. We've seen it in other communities where they have the fire station, where
Right.
condos are up above.
Yep.
So I'm definitely not opposed to that, but I think for us to even get to that level.
Right. What do
to
we
know
actually need?
I think the benchmarking isn't gonna be that hard to do, and I think it's gonna be very telling. So the gentleman that said there's 200 people that report here, that would tell you that unless the city is 4 times less efficient than the city of Kaukauna, either the departments that they're comparing to aren't the same. So I could see going to the surrounding communities and saying, okay, Bellevue, how large is your this, your fire station and your city, your municipal building, and what services are housed within there? Okay, move on, go to another, 4 or 5 neighboring communities. And it starts to tell the story of, these are buildings that exist, these are models of buildings that seem to be functioning appropriately, and, right out the gate, it kind of is confirming what we're now hearing when we interview the police chief,
Right.
and coming back with a space needs that might be 1.5 times what we currently have.
Right.
Well, that actually aligns perfectly with what we found in the neighboring municipalities.
Yeah, right.
So they're not-
Reinforces it as
Yeah.
opposed to,
Yeah. They're not being egregious and asking for
Right.
something, and I want to make sure that I say this at the table. It was never my point of bringing up the opposition. To me, if you can get past some internal instructive or constructive criticism, the chance of the project actually growing legs and moving forward gets better. If you can pass the threshold of financing and
Yeah.
figuring out what's
Yeah.
reasonable to
Right.
afford.
You'll never get an argument from me for being financially prudent about how we proceed.
And just in terms of benchmarking, this isn't a huge point, but neighboring communities, not always the most relevant.
Mhm.
I think looking at Appleton, Eau Claire, La Crosse, Kenosha, Racine, communities of like size
Yeah.
are probably better fits than a Bellevue. or
I would agree,
Howard.
because you could also make the statement, you have some urban resources that they are not addressing in a suburban environment.
Right.
Totally support that. Yeah, but you also don't have, you're not serving this population in the way that we are.
Yep.
Right.
Which is why we have this branch that doesn't
Right.
show up in your org chart.
Mhm.
But,
You'd have, certainly in the benchmark, you'd have to be cognizant of, well, how old is that facility that you're benchmarking against? And what is the growth projection for what you need in the future?
Sure.
So there's a little bit of,
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's no point, using a municipality that's going to be building a new city hall
That's
in
the
5
benchmark.
years when
mhm.
that's their benchmark now, so, I mean,
Right.
it's obviously, they need to be relevant to the case that's being made. But I agree, I mean, I think if you can get that benchmarking and you can find that path and the logic behind it, then it starts to make sense. It's sort of, okay. No other police department has all 48 vehicles undercover.
Right.
But maybe they're in Florida, or maybe they're in a different
Right.
climate, right? So what does that mean for us?
Right.
So we have a motion active on the table, we're in the discussion point.
And a second.
Okay. Okay, so any more discussion on that specific motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm going to abstain.
Yep, so that motion carries upon abstention. Is there any other motions, any other discussion?
Motion to adjourn?
Oh, I have one.
Yes.
What would be hugely helpful for me as a community member is, can we get the current floor plans for these any building that was conducted in the study.
Yep.
You know, just a stapled PDF
Yep.
or some, you know, I have not, I'm guilty of having stepped foot in some of the buildings we're talking about.
I think the plans are in the original reports.
Okay.
I know we have it.
Would it be helpful if, for the committee, if we had a tour of the two buildings?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
I know
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so Diana, are you the staff liaison for this group?
Yes, I can.
Okay, could you help facilitate that? Thank you. And maybe throw meeting court on there too, just because it's next door.
Yeah.
Please, be easy to knock out. Okay.
And let me, as I said, let me reach out to my contact and see if he can't be here as part of that
Sure.
as well, so that you guys have access to him and he will share your thoughts
Oh,
around.
that'd be great.
That would be
That's
awesome.
a really good
Yeah.
idea.
Him?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, that's a great idea.
yeah.
Great. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, I think we had a motion to adjourn,
Yes.
right? Somebody did that. Second by Mayor Genrich. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. All right, thank you, everybody,
Thank
for your
you.
time.
Thank you.
It's a good discussion today.
We'll
No,
see you
it's a
both
really
tomorrow.
good discussion, and
Stop.
not something we're capable of doing